Well, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Retelling Our Stories Using Writing as Resistance to Inaccurate Historical Perspectives, which is a mouthful, but I had to think of something anyway. But this is basically a combination of a little bit of workshop and a little bit of looking at what's available, things like that, and some resources. So we'll begin. I don't know. Ask the tech guy.
Oh, and now I messed it up. Testing. Hello. Oh, it's just for him.
So you guys might have to move forward. Cha ade yechat na'u, sha awudaneki, iyat yakini, gunas hachi ade, klingit enach, at kahin yucha duasak, tlekak enach, Vivian Martindale ka Prescott yucha duasak, yeth nach chatsati, taktain tan ayachat, Sami ka Somalinan yadi ayachat, ka Irish, ka Dutch, ka German. Howie Martindale, you do a sock ach kuch. Mitchell Prescott, you do a sock ach ish. Lorna Woods, you do a sock ach kla. Binkley ka Ahmedson, Dutch kan ayachat. Kach kana ach, dak us in aya, shitka kwan ye chatjati. Chashchidi ayachat. Ach tuwu yak ye chat ti gunas chish ach eight yis achi. Anyway, that's a mouthful when your mouth is dry. Anyway, thank you all for coming, and my Tlingit name is Utkahin, and my name is Vivian Prescott. That's my writing name, my maiden name, and I'm Tuktain Tan, and I'm also Sami and Somalinan. And my husband is Howie Martindale, and Mitchell Prescott and Lorna Woods are my parents. And I'm from the Binkley family and the Ahmedson family from Wrangell. And I live in Sitka right now. And I'm a writer. And thank you for listening to me. And now, my daughter.
Ade chatnayo, slinget stuchattu, slinget enach yesh yuchatu sak, drekak enach Vivian Mork yuchatu sak, yesh na chatsati, takrein tana yachat, te kwediadi yachat, kakagwantan dach chansu, ka Sami ayachat, ka Norwegian yadi ayachat, ka Hawaiian yadi ayachat, ka Heinz 57 ayachat, ka kachchana kuditika achuna kaudach yayidat shitkade. And that was just hello, because that's all I really want to translate. No, do forgive me if I did make any mistakes, because I'm just a learner. I'm only learning Tlingit, and but we try to teach as we know, as we learn things, because we're kind of in a race against time with our language. But I kind of call myself a Tlingit language teacher, but I don't have a teaching degree, so I don't know about that so much. But in Tlingit, my name is Yeishk, or Cute Little Raven. In English, my name is Vivian Mork. I'm from the Raven moiety. I'm Tuktain Tan. I'm a child of the Tekwedi, the brown bear. I'm a grandchild of the Kagwan Tan. I was born and raised in Wrangell. My kawu's from Huna, but now I live in Sitka. And I guess that's Tuktain Tanish, because when I look at that Tlingit country map, we're everywhere. But I guess that's if you're Tlingit. My favorite saying in Tlingit is, the longer we keep talking, the sooner we're going to find out we're related. Kind of happens everywhere we go. But this presentation is kind of done between my mother and I. We are both writers. We love to write. And in the process of getting our master's degree, it's a painful process going through Alaska Native literature and what's out there and what's available, and knowing how much is not out there. And so this is kind of came from all of that research. And I think that you should talk now and I should stop talking. So,
this is going to be what I call an interactive workshop. So we're going to focus a little bit on how Indigenous peoples use writing to revise history, as just the whole idea of writing as a form of resistance to inaccurate historical perspectives. So that's what I really want to focus on is you as writers, or you as playwrights, screenwriting, whatever you're interested in, how writing can be used today to rewrite anything that you see is inaccurate. And we're going to focus, though not entirely, on some of these writers that Andy Hope, Ernestine Hayes, Nora Downhauer, Yates, Robert Davis Hoffman, and others too. And if we forget anybody, it's not an all-inclusive thing, but we also have a display here, and these are our books here. And so there's some stuff you can look up there. And also there's a table being sold, a lot of books today. So if you get to that table, you'll see more books that are available. So you're going to...
Andy Hope, he's created the Clan Conference that we're here at, and this book, Will the Time Ever Come, came from this Clan Conference, from the creation of this Clan Conference. I have to sit in front of the mic, so I'm recorded. I will walk around the room, so remind me. There's a lot of good knowledge in a little bit of books here and there, and it's important to be able to look them out, but Andy's words in his poetry, I think, is some of my favorite things that I've read that Andy wrote. And this is definitely one of my more favorite of his poems, The Spirit of Brotherhood. They sing Onward Christian Soldiers down at the A&B Hall. Every year in convention. The kids don't like that song. They don't like missionary history. We shove that in the closet nowadays. The church had little to do with A&B adopting this battle song. William Paul Sr. introduced it after he heard it at Lodge 163 of AF and AM, Portland, Oregon. The Masonic Lodge influence. The song bothers me. That's no secret. But my people went into the church to survive. I don't know what the pioneer days were like up here in Gold Rush, Alaska. I listen to the Black Church and think about the music of the Black Spirit and the gospel of Sam Cooke and the Soul Stirrers, Otis Redding, and others. That spirit catches you. When you walk into the meeting and feel like family, you'll know what I'm saying.
Interesting. I was looking for some resources to maybe print off or add to our disc, and I came across this quote by Lydia George, which I wasn't looking for anything, and I know that she passed away recently. And I was at a actual workshop. I think Ish was doing the salmon story here in Juno, and Lydia was on the panel of educators. And I remember, and I wrote this down, so it was actually in one of my documents, and it just stood out at me. So if my computer had all these zillions of files, and I just went in, and in seconds I found her name just popped right out. And this is the quote from 2005 where she says, "Our history is our identity." And I thought it really fit this talk, so I wanted to make sure that we got that in. And if you remember this morning, if you were at the talks, the welcoming, and Ellen Hope Hayes, she commanded everyone to write things down during this conference, and that's exactly what I'm going to command you to, but I can blame it on her. So Ellen had said, write things down, jot down ideas, be creative, think about things when you're going to all these different talks. And so this is these little notebooks that you can carry. So, and some of these creative historical interpretations, when you go, you can look at these books, but there's Andy Hope's work, Ernestine's, Robert Davis Hoffman, and Vivian Mork. She hasn't published a book yet, but she memorizes her own poetry and performs it too. So, and then Bert Adams and Nora Downhauer are some of the examples that we're going to go through. And trying to define history is really weird thing to define, such an abstract concept, but I had to go to the internet, so this isn't me. This is some probably historians and kind of a collection of what people say history is. A narrative of events, and I added oral traditions. Could be a chronological record, a formal written account, an established record of behavior, and a branch of knowledge that records and analyzes past events.
History is a really cool thing to look at. I think a lot of people, once we go through the history, I did it again, walking away. When we look at history in the school system, a lot of times when we go to school, most people hate history. It's like the class that they hate the most, which is weird because it's one of the most interesting things on the planet is the weird things that human beings do and how we try to tell other people about it. When you look at history, a lot of times when history has been written, it's popular culture. It's whatever's popular at the time is how kind of the cool people get documented, you know, that kind of thing. And if you're not one of the people writing your own history, then your history just doesn't get told, or it gets told by other people. And so for Alaska Native people, we're very aware of the fact that our history has been told by other people again and again and again and again. And luckily now we have people telling our own histories. We have, you know, Andy Hope's books that he was doing for now. We have your father, William Hensley, who is writing. And we have Dick and Nora Dowenhauer and this book, The Russians in Tlingit America, a rewriting of the battle that happened in Sitka, how powerful that is to have that kind of book for our people to be able to look at. We can argue about the inaccuracies of everything ever written, ever told, and whose versions of which oral tradition is what. But it's really cool that it's being able to put down in books so that in 50 years, those elders and those people still get to be with us. Their words still get to teach us. And that is so powerful. History can be very powerful that way. And the written word can be very powerful. It was amazing. We were sitting at the group today. Robert Bringhurst was talking about how, here's a writer talking about how he looks forward to the day when writing disappears and we go back to our oral traditions. That was a pretty powerful statement from a writer, from someone who loves to write and is passionate to write. So my mom's quotes that she got here from Frederick Turner: each age tries to form its own conception of the past. Each age writes the history of the past anew with reference to the conditions uppermost in its own time, because history is created in context. I think we forget that when we look back at history. A lot of times, because when we're taught history, it's in that historical timeline of 1492, 1776, 1870. You know, you got whether you're looking at the Vietnam War here, you forget, there's 100 years of things happening before the Vietnam War that created it, or things like that. Especially when you look at colonization of Alaska Native people, you have to look at the world history before you even know your own history sometimes, and how all those other groups of human beings came to be where they were at that moment in history to make the changes on our cultures that happened so quickly. Let's see. What? I don't have to do the other one? Okay. So when you're looking at the history and the historical timeline, you go online and you're trying to research things, you often find that our history starts with Russian contact. And as an Alaska Native person, you're going, what about the other 10,000 or so years? There's a few more. And anytime you try to talk to your history teacher in high school about it, they just get a deer in headlights look back at you. They don't know what to do about it. And I got to experience going to the Arctic Institute for Indigenous Leaders this winter, and I met an amazing group of people, and we did this project called a historical timeline, and it actually took, I think, longer than they thought it would. But what happened was an amazing amount of dialogue. We and I even brought my freezer paper. So we got out our freezer paper, and we all come from all these different areas all over, and we all have all of this different knowledge, because not one human being in a culture has all the knowledge of one culture. But when all of us came together, it was amazing to see all the different history that we were able to put up. And we did from time immemorial to present. And you get back down, I think it was right around the 1200s or 1300s, maybe 1500s, before we really had contact here. We realized that we had filled in all this space in the contact section. And then at the time immemorial part, maybe we had a story, Nazi Thane and Strongman and stuff. And there was this whole section that was just empty. And all of us were wondering, where's that knowledge? Who has that knowledge? What was happening? And so I couldn't leave it blank. So I went there and I wrote a line down and I said, we went to fish camp. And someone else came over and they said, and we got married and we fell in love, and someone, oh, and we had children, and oh, we traded with Athabascans, or it was lots of fun, when we realized, oh wait, our history was still happening. Of course, it was just happening in a different way. And anyway, so when you're looking at the history, there's so many different ways to tell history. We often see it on that timeline, but there's so many modes of relating history, whether it's from the people's perspective. When you're reading the histories, like Dick and Nora's books, when you're reading the history from the people, or you're watching videos now, there's a lot of writing that does go into video. That's why I have the videos. I made my mom put the video part into it. But, oh, you want me to talk about why it's... Okay. You want me to do that part? Are you sure? Okay. All right. It's so important for us to be able to have these things, to be able to rewrite our own history, to be able to grab all of the tools that we have today to rewrite history, because if we don't, someone else is. There's a lot of cool things to write about, and especially as more and more people learn more and more about Alaska, and you get your various travelers. I don't know how many times I've met someone who's come to Alaska for 3 months, gone back, and now they're an expert in Alaska Native history, and they're down south selling books, and there's all those kinds of things happen all the time. We have our own people who are writing our own history. If we don't write our own history, we don't live the same way we used to, right? So if we have arguments about, well, our oral traditions need to be kept alive as oral traditions, but I'm not a human being who grew up in that oral tradition setting. I have adult ADD, and so maybe I'm not going to be able to memorize all those oral traditions, but if you give me that book, I'm going to read that story again and again, and I might read it to my children or my grandchildren, or if you put it into film, you can press play and the stories can be told over and over and over and over again.
I once interviewed Nora, and I asked her, Nora, would you consider your writing political? She said, oh, no, not in the Tlingit culture. No, not political. Well, I'm here to prove her wrong. She's not here. Yeah. Anyway, I just want to read of her books. Actually, my favorite is this one. This is the first one she had published through Blackcurrant Press in Haines, and I really like this book. This one's good too, of course, but I think there's some pretty powerful poems. And since I'm a poet at heart, I wanted to share with you and some ways of how we can take our history and turn it into poetry. The things that are happening now will be history, so it's important to document right now. Juno School in Service for Walter Sobolev. Tao Chun reads how it feels to be in a Tlingit system while a gauze of snow winds past the window as if to cover up the problem. And this one that I'm going to read from the same book is called Village Tour, because tourism is something that's happening to all of us, and this Nora kind of had an insight, and this is called Village Tour Nome Airport. There's 2 stanzas. 1. The tour guide slides her glossy smile toward the native seamstress. May I touch your coat? She does without an answer. They make them by hand. As if frozen, the seamstress sat. 2. Already freezing, a youth sits in handcuffs on his way to isolation in California, becomes part of the tour. They all go to jail, she says. Now this also has a date on it for April 12th, 1984, which Nora, you never know if the narrator actually witnessed these things, but it's probably that she did. And one of the ones that I was trying to draw out of her is when I asked her the question about her poems being political, is because I read the one about the Chilkoot River, and I was trying to get her in a little more dialogue. But if you ever read Nora's interviews, they're like 1 or 2 answers, so you have to have more than just a short interview with her. But she's great writer. This one is called Chilkoot River, Tlukak Adi Village. After the bulldozer went through the village site, no one bothered to look to see if they had uncovered anything of significance. They left where they uncovered a gravesite. The skull facing the road seemed to say, "Look at me, grandchild. Look at what is happening to me." If you look at all these books, some of the eras that aren't really being covered right now, you have some of, like a big gap, like the 1950s seems to be, 40s. There's a lot of literature being written now, probably First Contact, and then I guess a little bit of the celebration that everyone's been having about Alaska becoming a state. There's been some about that, but this one, and when you look at people's stuff that they've written, a lot of times writers can get ideas from other people, and that's okay. You don't want to plagiarize someone's work, but if something stands out and you think, wow, that would make a great play, that would make a great skit to bring into the classroom, or I'd love to write a poem and put myself in that person's head and figure out what that's about. You know, that's perfectly acceptable. Everyone borrows from everyone else. So what we have here is a scene I thought was really poignant for Nora. I'm just going to read it very briefly here. And I just imagined it as some kind of a skit or some kind of a piece in a documentary. You know, your mind can do whatever you want with it. But she says, "My life now is in many respects the opposite of my childhood. Then we lived much of the year on our boat and in hunting, fishing, trapping camps in the bush. We came into town only for provisions. Now it's a treat to go out on a boat. Coming to town in my childhood put us into first contact with whites. With this contact came our first experience with racism. From the first time I saw white hate, I experienced racism as a white-hot whip that can bring you to your knees with one strike. As a child, the stares of children were so hot and cruel that I cowered and wanted to hide and never come out again. I tried to shield my little brothers I was babysitting with my arms. I had nowhere to run with them. Once, the boat we were on had dried up on the tidal flats, and it was too high for me to take my brothers down from the deck. So we stood and took the rain of spears from their eyes until they left us alone because the tide was coming in and they couldn't taunt us anymore. Even now, after many decades, I'm still stinging from their white whip. These patterns still exist. They are alive and well today, and it hurts to see my grandchildren experience it. This was a negative aspect of growing up, and I try to be assertive today to help defend our youngest generation from the same patterns of abuse." But I just kind of, how she had that setting of the little kids stuck on the tide flats there, it was probably Juno here, and how the other kids were on the dock, you know, taunting them, and they couldn't leave. They had to stay there. And I thought that's an image that's a part of Nora's history, but it's a part of Juno's history. It's a part of Southeast history that can be taken by you if you're interested in making a skit, making something. Of course, you'd want to ask Nora for permission and get credit, but that's something like we can share with each other. There's some great ideas in these books to just, don't let the books just sit on your shelf, you know, carrying them into new directions. Okay, first assignment. Everybody ready? You got your little Easter egg colored tablets there? I want you to take just a few minutes and think of some of the topics that you might write about in your family, your community. If you can't come up with 5 to 10, it's okay. But we're just going to give you just a few minutes to think about. And I just kind of listed this, but just let your imagination go, and if you want to, we can share a little bit. But okay, go ahead.
I think it's important to note that we all have a history. Every single one of us in this room have a history, and it's a history of people. It's a history. There's so many Alaska Native stories that are sitting right here in this room, and many of them are even connected to each other. And all of our stories influence each other, but our histories, not just the blank history of, or the vague history of Alaska or Alaska people, but our own personal histories are important. So for me, when I look at this list, I think, well, geez, it all affects me. But I definitely look at like the things that have affected my personal history. The first thing that pops out for me is high school dropout. The first thing that drops out, or pops out to me, is that because my mom was a high school dropout, my dad was a high school dropout, everybody in my family dropped out of high school, and now my mom has a PhD. So, I look at how history, looking at my own personal history, looking at how we were able to overcome those things and eventually rewrite our own history in the future by us being able to look at our own personal history and make choices in the future that ended up changing that. And can I read Robert Hoffman's thing now, or do I have to wait? So Robert Davis Hoffman, he's here. I think he's presenting probably right now, or talking right now in another room. But he's such an amazing writer, and just such an amazing artist and human being. And I read these words the other night from him, and I wish I could tattoo them on myself. Anyway, and some of them, but I have tattoos that fill up too much where I could put it anyway. So anyway. Writing comes from one's particular experiences and involvement in this world, in his world, from one's participation in his own unique history. I am a neo-traditional artist storyteller, neo-traditional in that I believe in the continuous creation theory. Everything is in perpetual renewal. Tradition and ritual are reenactment or reproduction, and they are accurate, hardly variable, because they are intended to recall. They are connections to the past. They are necessary because they ground us and affirm who we are in relation to where we have been. But we are more than just our past. We are also reactions to the immediate present. We require rituals for contemporary themes. Form and content for older ritual are modified as they accommodate newer circumstances. The warrior mentality and associated rituals are now acted out on the basketball courts, secret societies, and their exclusivity are enacted behind closed offices and new native corporations. Artists and writers are using the old forms in new variations to address contemporary social issues. In this way, the old and the new becomes one thing in the present. Isn't that cool? Wish I wrote that. But just Robert Davis, just to hear those words, to know that in 2 pages of something that he wrote in an intro that he might not even think so much about anymore, is still inspiring young Native people today who pick this up, looking for themselves, looking to see themselves in some book, find it and go, oh, you said what I was thinking. Thank you. But it's just, so when you're looking at what you want to write about, what is important to your history, what is important to you is most likely going to be important to many of the people around you. But a lot of times we aren't going to know that if we don't get to write it, if we don't get to tell our stories, if we don't get out there. There was a lot of times, or there seems to be something that happened from the boarding school generation, this trauma that we experienced of complacency, of not speaking up, of not telling our stories. And that's so hard on a people that was just telling stories for thousands of years to stop telling our stories. We have new stories today to tell, and unfortunately they are very hard. Many of them are very hard. But the telling of our stories is part of our healing process. Anyway.
Does anybody have, now that you've had more than 5 minutes, anybody want to share a couple from your list? Kakishawu? Anybody?
What you just read totally plays with what I was saying. I was telling Carrie that it's 2009, and that's something that I often have to remind myself and when I'm in certain situations. It's exactly what you're saying, like it's the old and the new mixing together, and that has to be acceptable because traditions, to me, are things that can be happening right now. McDonald's is part of the Tlingit culture now. Basketball is part of the Tlingit culture, and so yeah, old and new.
Ramen at a potlatch.
Junk food, did you write down? Anybody else want to share anything that they came up with?
Well, I don't know so much about writing. I teach history in the Yakmat school district, and in almost every lesson, I bring it back to, well, just an example is the history of segregated schools or in Alabama, whatever. And I said, did you know we had segregated schools here? And I went to a segregated school, and there was a school out for non-native children, and it's a real eye-opener. So when we talk about the Middle East, I talk about the displacement of the Palestinians who have been there for eons and for a long, long time. The same with Native peoples in the lower 48 and Native peoples in Alaska. So I not so much writing, or we incorporate writing in our lessons, but not so much for me writing, but drawing analogies between what's happening in the world and in Western history with our own Native history.
I love that you said that, because I really, really, really love learning about other people and other cultures, because what I found in my own process of learning about the history of other peoples is that I learn more about myself. And you learn that we're actually all kind of the same. The details vary from culture to culture and things like that, but you find, especially when you do indigenous studies, and you find that we have this very similar history of colonization and survival, and and our reactions to assimilation, and and you find a lot of times the same tools for healing and things like that in these cultures all around the planet. And it's really nice to be able to go, like Walter was speaking today about the Maori in New Zealand. It's really nice to be able to go there and to see what they're doing and to go, hey, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can make something like that here. We just clinketize it or haidatize it or nupiakize it, or, whatever it is that we got to ize it, into whatever culture is yours. And of course, if you're Tlingit, Russian, whatever your mix is. And then what happens usually, because when you're teaching in a classroom today, most of the time you're not teaching in a classroom that's just Tlingit anyways, especially if you're teaching history. You have people from all sorts of ethnicities, and Tlingit people have been loving all sorts of cultures for a long time. So we're Tlingit Hawaiian, Tlingit Russian, Tlingit, we have all these histories that we carry inside of us. And so when you get to teach those, you can bring in history from your students, and incorporate that into your classroom. And so when you get to be able to know more and more about the information that's out there for Alaska Native people, there's a lot of information to be able to bring into your classroom. And just in case, I think that a few of them have already been taken, but if you haven't gotten one yet, you should. There's CDs on the back table. I'm going to say this before they go away. CDs on the back table has an annotated bibliography that is literally pages and pages and pages long of Tlingit research that my mother has found all over, published and unpublished. Pretty cool, huge amount.
Karen? Yeah, I'm an author of a book too. I wrote in 1979 in San Francisco, titled Through the Storm Towards the Sun. And in one of the parts, I heard the story from Auntie about the Russian era. My auntie lived in Bailey. It was handed down from the grandmas that were present at that Battle of Sitka. And she told me the story, and she sang a song that I'll probably never hear again. It was so beautiful, I didn't understand, but the feelings she put into it were just absolutely beautiful. I started to cry. It was about this warrior. He must have been related to the family, because she was so it carried away when she sang the song, and she told me the story about him being captured. But all this time they thought he was gone, because they saw an explosion when the Russians were retreating, and he headed down the beach after them. So they thought he was dead, and then later he came back as an old man. So I hesitated to write it because I know that you're supposed to be, you should write something of your own tribe or whatever. So I finally did, because I couldn't lose it. It was too beautiful. And so I bought the rights to put the picture of Battle of Sitka in my book. It's out there. So I really am interested in that Russian era, and the other I'm really interested in is our Indian schools, when we'd have to walk all the way down to the village to go to school because we couldn't go to the other school. And the other was World War II, which really touched a lot of us.
Yes.
So thank you.
Yeah, and if you guys didn't hear, the title of her book is Through the Storm Towards the Sun, Carol Brady. It's for sale right now out on the books, the Sea Alaska table that's distributing books. And I just actually wanted to comment on what Carol said. You know, there was, if you heard her talking about the hesitation, I think as Native people, we hesitate to put so much of our stuff in writing because of the backlash that we get from our own peoples. Unfortunately, it will probably happen no matter what you write, including if it's a children's story and it's only 10 pages long.
Say something to that. I'm glad you brought that up. You know, I was going to talk about that this morning. I forgot that. But a simple statement about who you heard the story from is enough.
Yeah.
That's all you have to do.
Yes.
We try to make that a complicated issue, but it's not. When my grandmother talked about the Dekwedi people, we're Raven, Kashkakwan, she would say, "This is not our story. This is the Dekwedi brown bear story." Then she'd tell the story. That's all we need to do, a simple protocol. Some people don't like that word protocol, but I think it's appropriate here. It's not very complicated, as long as we say who it's from. And this is what this whole intellectual property rights issue is coming over, because a lot of people have repeated our material, and they never say who told them.
Yeah.
And you know, when you're sitting there, and if you're the one who told them and they don't say that you said, you're going to be offended, you're going to sit there, well, I'm the one who told them that, you know. And the elders expect that. If the elder says something, they want to be recognized. That's all. It's not very complicated. So I'm glad you brought that up. It's a good issue.
Yes, definitely. Because we have a lot of cultural things that make it very difficult for us to be able to write our own, even our own story. When we get down to sitting down to do it, we're like, oh, we can't do that. That's my grandfather's story, or my father's people's story, or, you know, and like you said, getting permission, you know, to be able to tell that story. Then there's everybody's ideas of how you get that permission, I guess. But really, if you come from a place of respect, I think that that is just the most important thing, because no matter what you do in this life, you're going to make mistakes, especially if you stand up to go say anything or write anything. And then once it's written, you're in for it then. You know, you'll never hear the end of it. But after all the backlash is gone and we've moved on, people are going to forget those things. People will forget that. And so I think it's more important to maybe for us to get our coarser skin on, deal with the backlash for the good of the future, do it anyway. And because books like Carol's, you know, books like the Dauenhauers, you know, those are things now that people who are from fractured and broken families who are trying to search out for themselves are going to these places to find them in these sources. So we need more.
Well, I'm glad that you brought out the fact that it's healing to share.
Yes.
You know, that book has lots of sharing in it now. That was back in 1979, you know, and I started healing. I didn't know that then, but I started healing after writing it. So yeah, a lot of people could relate here and open up too. So that was the idea that a lot of people said it was. I didn't realize it then. Thank you.
I'm going through high school right now, and I started my freshman year over at Mount Edgecombe, and I was one of the only non-natives on my floor. So I got to both witness racism and record it, and it was really interesting for me because I come from a family of natives down south, and in recording all these stories that I hear, when the girls eventually befriended me, it was really hard because I would always remember my great-grandmother, who was either of any native Indian down south, and she never got to tell her story because her husband ended up beating it out of her. And as I was recording all these stories and I'm trying to publish them with everybody's permissions and going through those hoops, I'm constantly reminded that not everybody has a story anymore. So this workshop is kind of cool because it's like encouraging everybody to tell their story no matter where it came from. It's really awesome.
Is there another question?
Yeah, but my name is Jack Williams, and I'm from the family from Taco River. And my great-grandfather, Billy Williams, was a family from Taco River. And he told me a story that I want to share with Alaska elders and Tasman elders and all the elders that we can share with. What I want to tell the truth because the way my grandpa told me to tell the story, the true way of the thinking ways that we work in the Taco River as a flag leader. And for the young generation, they should know about the story of the Taco River. And the thing is here, I want to make sure it's true story. And in our culture-wise, we work close to one another. And that's why I'm here to get help from the elders to say, yes, that's true story. And Grandpa used to tell the story to Alaska people. I forgot the name of the elders that they're gone now. They used to be here in 1942, 43, and stuff like that. And I want to share this story with the people in Alaska, with the elders, and in the Yukon all over. There's a story from one place where our thinking nation had plan system government, Yukon or Alaska or anything. We all work together in a good way. And this story is about the war with Taliban, and it's quite a long story. And I want to share it with Alaska elders, and that's why I'm here now to represent it to the people. So I want to get advice how or what can I do about it to share it with the Alaska elders and the Alaska people. And a long time ago, when we used to do things together, we used to be like a hand, like this, and all together and strong. And we have to follow our plan system government right close and to be good with one another and look at one another in the true way of our system, our culture. And to be strong together, that's what I want. And I was taught over and over with my grandpa telling me this story. He said, you tell this story like the way I told you. And if you don't you add anything that you want in your favor, you tell it the way I told you. And that's what's in this book here. And I want to say this much, that in the time went by, we were in the government way of going. We lived on reserve, and the government had something to do with us, and it couldn't come out with us. So I just waited until the time has come. And when we come from the chief and consular, everybody, our people said, we don't want the chief and consular, we want to go back to clan system government, our own government. And that's what we are now. And several clan people in Tasman are clan system government. And they're getting stronger and stronger. And this is where I like to see everything happen. That our government is important, and we're going to do it the right way, to share with one another in an honest way, and the true way for the young generation to teach them our language, to be strong together, for the young generation to carry what I'm telling you now, carry on to the people, and when they get to our age, they'll still be talking in our thinking system, what we call system government. And in this story here, it tells about when they had the war with Taliban, and when the Taco River thinking won the war, everything was on here, it's been settled. And the way our land of Taco River went, that we all in the thinking nation owns all the watershed of Taco River. That's the only borderline they had, because they went by Mother Nature's way of working together. And to understand one another, Mother Nature built this earth for us, and we have to use the borderline like the watershed and all over for our territory. And there's a lot of anything, and the Crow people in Athens went and adopted the system that the Tackle made when they won the war. So the headwaters of lots of rivers over where the Yukon borders are and everything is marked by ticket ways of Hatton Crow people. There's the quarterly leader here, and he is marked by the creeks. And that's what we want to go by. We want to go by what the white man put the borders in like this. We want to follow our culture ones. Our cultures are often strong government, if we can handle together the right way and the strong way. And please understand, I'm here to share this story about the war with the Alaska people, and I want to give advice, how can I do it? I don't want to say, just because I'm a candidate for Tackle River, I'll do it this way, do it this way. No, I want the elders to come together and say, it's good, let's work at it the right way. And this is why I'm here now. And I'm shocked that my great-grandfather, don't push yourself. You listen to the people have to say something. And this is why I'm here now, and I'd like to see that young people to take notice of our culture and to be strong with it. And the way we handle it to be strong is to be honest and the right way of going with our Mother Nature's way, that the Mother Nature made the earth for us to look after. And please understand, this fish that comes up Alaska all over, it swims, and it swims right back to where it was born. And this is what I want to do. I want to take people to swim back to their culture and their language to be strong again. That's what I like to see. I'm talking to you this way because I'm a candidate to Tackle River, and I want my great-grandfather to say so what he told me to say to the people. With that, I thank you all, and I hope women, men, all join hands and be honest with one another and work together in a strong way about thinking cultural ways to be strong, and let's work on the language. Thank you.
Atlein Gunalchish. Atlein Gunalchish. I think that was a very beautiful metaphor of having our people swimming back to our culture like the salmon in the stream. That was beautiful, Gunalchish. There are a lot of stories to tell. There are a lot of stories that our people have. For our southeast Tlingit, for our inland Tlingit, we are the same people, and we have our stories are shared together. So many stories to be told, and so many stories that I would love to see get into print, so that we can get them out into the hands of our young people, so that our young people are not so lost anymore, and we know where we come from and how we're all connected, so that we don't lose our connections with our Canadian family.
Can I say something just before I get going into this?
Yep.
I'd like to, I know a lot of you have read, see Richard and Nora Downhar's book over there. And if you read the stories that are put in those books, the elder will always say, this is how it was told to me. But you'll never see in there where that elder says, I had to go ask permission from that person to tell that story. And I'll tell you why he didn't have to do that. Because if I'm the elder and I tell the story, if I'm telling to you, I'm giving you permission to tell the story. I'll give you an example of the cannibal story. The cannibal story was told in Cluckwan. A woman came from Bella Bella, way down in British Columbia, came up here and married a Cluckwan man. In those days, you went with the woman you married. You didn't go to his community, you went to her community. Now you can trace the cannibal story all the way down the coast. And you know why you can? And if we could talk to her today, if she was here today, she would say, tell us the story, and she'd say, this is how it was told to me. And you'll see it in the Downhauer books, that's how it's done. This idea of asking, you know, it's a new concept, a lot of it. I'm 65 years old. When I was a kid, in the 40s and 50s, when there was a lot of old timers, I never heard of that. I talked to Nora Downhill. She never heard of that either. This new, what's going on, we're bringing on new rules. And we're making up the rules as we go, and some of them are causing real problems. Now, I appreciate our elder back there saying that, what he said. But I'm almost positive I never heard in my younger life where we had to go ask somebody. If an elder shared a story with you, that means he's given you the story. And all the thing that we talked about is him, you, if it's you, is to say, this is the way Walter Porter said it to me, or this is the way the Keshkakwan people told me the story. So I just want to say that because it confuses me when people say, you got to ask permission. How could that woman go all the way down there to Bella Bella every time she wanted to tell a story, and we're way up here and we couldn't communicate and ask permission? So the stories passed all over. The communications was absolute and far-ranging all through the different cultures. Many, many stories, like the books you're holding up there. And this permission thing is a strange concept to me. It really is. So anyway.
It's about right.
Well, it's yeah, and that's what I think people have to remember when you're looking at who's making the new protocols, is that it's just about respect. It's about respecting the sources of where things come from. And when you look at how our societies changed back in the day, when we're all living together in one house, we all know each other's stories, every skeleton in each other's closets. We know what we smell like in the morning, back then. And things were just different. The storytelling was different. So when you heard a story, you knew, because everyone else was hearing the same story at the same time. And so there was no stealing of anything, because it was sharing of everything. And some of those people that share those stories today, Carol Brady, our visitor from the inland, and we have Kadashan from Yakutat, who's, he writes a lot. He's got his online website now. Kadashan Speaks, I think is what it is. And Doris Bailey wrote this book about her husband. This is a very excellent book to read. Ernestine Hayes's Blonde Indian. There's so many different Alaska Native perspectives and stories and things to read about. There's all the pre-contact, there's all the contact, there's the war and how it affected people. There's just every single one of us have stories that we're connected to, and luckily there are things that are in print, but a lot of it hasn't been collected into one spot where we can walk into that store and go, oh, this is the Alaska Native bookstore, and this is my one-stop shop for all Native information. We don't have that. It'd be really cool. So whoever's going to go out and get that loan, please call me and tell me. I will frequent your bookstore immediately and always. My favorite is of when I like to bring in a picture of Chief Shake's house that was done in, I think it was 1898. And I get kids in my middle school classroom who want to argue with me about what tradition is, because everybody's grandpa comes with them in the classroom and says, at least in their voice, and says, well, my grandpa said. And then we have to have this big discussion about tradition. And I show them the picture of Chief Shake's house in 1898, and he's got electricity in there. So, if you're looking at what tradition is it 100 years ago or 200 years ago or 300, I like, my preference is Robert Davis's version of history, in that we're recreating and recalling everything as everything's transforming as times change. But, and Alaschools has an insane amount of information. If you are looking for all sorts of historical information is on that, as well as curriculum, Alaska history. If anyone is interested in implementing Alaska history into their, into anything that they're doing, a lot of work has already been done by people. I already mentioned the Library of Congress. And you can even look at everything from the Merriman expedition reports to various Russian ethnographers. I mean, just tons and tons of stuff is there at the Library of Congress. The Alaska Native Knowledge Network is a great source as well. And the Sea Alaska Archives, what was his name? Go next. Zach Jones, archivist at Sea Alaska. Bug him. Lots. She wants me to do the drawing real quick. Kind of cutting it short. What?
How do you know if your book gets into the Library of Congress? Is there a certain thing, a number you have in it? Or?
Actually, it wouldn't be, I don't think the books would be going into the Library of Congress in that way, although, maybe they should. I didn't think about it that way.
Yours should be in there.
Yeah, it's predominantly historical documents and pictures. Yeah. It's an amazing amount. You really can get swamped with all of the information that's out there. And that's why on that CD that we made, because we knew that we wouldn't actually be able to present a lot of that information to you, we wanted to make sure that you left with it. So that is pages and pages and pages of where you can find Tlingit and Alaska Native and Indigenous history. I think it's predominantly, though, written works is what my mother's collected.
How do you go about publishing stories that you were able to collect? How do you publish that kind of history?
You gotta go the same route as everybody else, which is a little difficult. We do have, there's a lot of books that are out there. We do have some of those books here. When you're going to start to actually think about really publishing, there's a lot of different avenues that you can actually go today. There's so many different ways that you can do it. You can either publish yourself, which is kind of expensive, slow process, and then you got to promote yourself all over the place, but it's possible. The other is that you can put your stuff online. You don't even actually have to do the books, although I love the smell of pages and paper turning, so I will never be able to be completely digital. But it is really cool that you can start archiving and publishing on the internet. And there's all sorts of websites out there that you can actually sell your book to, and they don't even actually put it into print. It's just always downloaded, and you make 99 cents off of every download or something, depending on what that is. But there's also a few publishers, that maybe cater towards Alaska Native stories, like the University of Arizona Press, UAF, the Alaska Native Knowledge Network people, Cross-Cultural Studies program. They put out a lot of different Alaska Native things. A lot of times it's through the people that are going and taking their courses, but they are interested in all sorts of things. And depending on how you want to write and what you want to write would depend on how you want to gear that. There's children's books are always, I think, a very decent seller, but it depends on who your audience is and who you're selling, whose story you're telling. If it's your story, if it's other people's story, that all has to come into how you publish things and who will take your publications. And my mother has a stack of rejection letters, that she got, so she just keeps putting them in and putting them in, and every now and then she gets published. But there are some easy books out there, easy enough books, just basic, simple how to write a book proposal that you're going to actually present to, the publisher out there. And then there are also, if you're into poetry or anything, there are these huge, thick Poets Market books that tell you all the places you can go in the history in the world to try to get your stuff published. There's also Writers Market books just like that, and they print them every single year. And that they update everything that's, everything that's new. So those books are like writing Bibles.
You might know how we could track down an old book, like the Totem Lore. There were many good writers in there with old stories about the animals with us, long ago.
I find myself to be able to find the older stuff if it's out of print. I go onto eBay, I go to Amazon.com, and I also frequent weird bookstores. Hole-in-the-wall bookstores, that kind of thing, to find the things that are out of print. Unfortunately, a lot of the old stuff you can't, a lot of things you can't get anymore. Oh, I'm not supposed to look. I'm kicking a door prize.
If you ever have a real old book that's coming apart and has all those old legends in there, would you be able to find a place they could fix it up so that...
Oh, there are people that do bookbinding anymore and refix books? They used to. I know they used to. I don't know if they do anymore.
Yeah,
Is there?
there used to be
lithograph?
the website, Abracadabra, I think it was called, out of Denver. And I got under Mount St. Elias, they would send me a list of how many under Mount St. Elias books they had. And they'd come up with some real hard books to get a hold
Say
of.
good one, the first one.
Abracadabra, I think, was there, abracadabra.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have these really inexpensive journals, but they should fit in your purse or your back pocket or inside pocket. So say goot one, the first one.
Okay. I didn't do that on purpose. I know she's my friend. But I'm gonna do it. Ross. Where's Ross? She ran away already.
I'll be right here.
Here, let me do it.
Yeah.
Vernon William? Is that you? Yeah.
Dial.
Thanks for that $5 for that.
Agnes London.
You already did Robert's stuff?
Yeah, I did.
Here, we'll just do this one real quick. Or you want to talk about something else?
You're doing it.
This one might take too long.
Yeah. Okay. We can either do that or this. Whichever one.
Well, let me just tell you a little bit about this technique, and then you guys can actually do this on your own. But this is a really cool way of taking all these historical documents that you're going to come in contact with and all these photographs you're going to see this next couple days, and really look at them. And I like being a poet, taking words and turning them in on themselves. This is Thomas Jefferson Morgan's Commissioner of Indian Affairs report from 1889. And one of the techniques I use, even as a poet, is taking these and circling all the words that you think are very interesting, very offensive, very cool, very enlightening, very whatever, but just interesting words or ideas in there that you want to explore further. Because sometimes you'll find some really great characters in these, and this actually is the basis for one of my poems that I wrote. When I read this article in Commissioner Morgan's work here, at the same time my daughter was in the Juno School District when someone spray painted KAN all over town, which is an acronym for Kill All Natives. And so what I did was take this document and try to re-explain history using two different techniques of combining contemporary poetry, or anyway, I'll just read it quickly because you'll see the words that are in there, because I used the report. So the title is Report on Indian Education, October 1889, Washington, D.C., Juneau, Alaska, 2003. So that's the title of this poem. These are the general principles for a system of education, says Commissioner of Education Thomas J. Morgan, October 1889, giving the same speech then as he gave today, when he walked into the 21st century and saw my daughter sitting in the back of the high school classroom, slouching in her chair, and said, now these are the words from that document. I can plagiarize him, he's long dead. Whatever steps are necessary under any circumstances, education is the Indians' only salvation. They will become honorable, useful, happy citizens in a great republic, sharing all its blessings. And when he left the class, he walked down the hall, shaking a can of spray paint, and handed it to a kid who sprayed KAN, Kill All Natives, plastered on the walls, painted in the middle of the road, etched on the rock bluffs, announcing the Indians' only salvation. And there were board meetings, town meetings, public testimony, newspaper articles, and the commissioner sat in the back of the room, sent the memorandum round, whispering,
Whatever steps are necessary, education is Indians' only salvation. They will become honorable, useful, happy citizens in a great republic, sharing all its blessings. Now you see what I did is took the words from that document and put them into a contemporary situation, because this guy's saying this is what you do in the educational system so that you can, be the great American. But here it is in 2003, they're still saying the same words, but yet we have that conflict with that incident in Juno where, the letters were spray painted all over. So anyway, my daughter ended up dropping out, and that was one of the incidents that was basically the last thing that she experienced. But anyway, that's one way that you can do that, is research all these old documents, look at those words, turn them around, give them a contemporary spin. And if you're thinking of screenwriting, you can even go, have Commissioner Morgan be in your contemporary setting, or you can, bring those things into many, many different genres. You can write a short story around that, the whole ideas behind that Commission of Education. So anyway, that's what I do, is I take a highlighter pen, I think in pink. I don't know, I don't like pink. But I take a pink highlighter and I circle those words that stand out. And that section that he said was what really stood out to me. So I've written quite a lot of poetry and things, and doing that technique is you just find the words, use the language of the times. It makes very interesting writing too. Anyway.
And I'll try to make this one really quick, clink it quick. So the retelling the history using film, when we were talking about writing and everything, and when I look at what we're doing today, I see that we're in a race against time. We are in a race against time. And the time that takes to write a book, I don't know how many of you have written a book. I wrote a 20-page essay for a class once, just about drained me. I can't imagine the people that have already gone ahead and written all these big books and how much time it takes to write and edit and to make sure all that information is accurate. Video. As one of those ADD kid generations, I say video, let's put it all digital. And it is a modern form of storytelling. And it is a modern form of storytelling that my generation and younger really, really, really relate to. And there are so many stories that are already being told through video. There was the On Your Knees Cave documentation. There's Ha Shagun. There's the Aleut evacuation story. My favorites that I've recently seen now are some really cool ones by my friend Rachel. She did the history of the duck-in in Barrow. I don't know how many of you know that history, but this is a really cool video to watch about the history of the duck-in in Barrow. She also did the history of language loss for Inupiaq people. Oops, upside down. And this one just got filmed at the Native Film Festival. Got screened there in Anchorage, and I felt like when I watched this, it might be an Inupiaq film, but I felt like when I watched it, I could have replaced the word Inupiaq for Tlingit, and that the faces that I was looking at were actually the faces of my aunties and uncles and grandparents. It's amazing to be able to watch these stories.
Both words mean the same thing, being human being.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So.
Another fun one that they did here is a documentary of Maori and Inupiaq cultural exchange going to the World Indigenous Peoples Conference on Education in 2005 in New Zealand. Amazing. They taught the little kids how to run all the equipment, and they documented their own process and their own interactions. It's just beautiful. It's an amazing story. So we all have stories to tell, and so when you're looking at the race against time, if you're documenting language, if you're documenting stories, I highly, highly recommend using video. And because a lot of times now, all that digital video is so easy, I can take my camera, plug it into my internet, and I could probably have it downloaded and out on the internet for other people to see within 15 minutes. I mean, that's how cool the internet is getting when you're trying to put stuff out there. So, of course, it wouldn't be very edited or pretty if I did it that way, but it'd be out there. But video is just a beautiful way to tell history. And then the cool thing about it, the one thing you get from written history, you get all the writing, but when you do the video, you get their voice and their face. And in 50 years, those people that you love, that you recorded, are still teaching you. I love video as a mode of telling stories. Actually, I think it's important just to say rewriting history. You don't have to write a huge history book that's going to go into a classroom to rewrite history. It can be your own personal story. It can be your autobiography. It can be the story of your grandparents. It can be the story of the town you grew up in. It can be so many things. You can write history through poetry. You can write history through songs. You can write history through film. There's a lot of ways to document and write your history. We're getting very close to the end, so we should probably just go. We kind of messed up somewhere. So one of the other things that you guys can do that I think is very important, and especially for the elders maybe that are in this room, is starting a writers group in your community. And it's not that you yourself, if you're not a writer, you don't have to write your own story, but if you go to the writers group with a story to tell, there might be a writer that wants to help you tell it. So starting a writers group in your community is fairly simple. You call up your friends and family who have the similar interests, and hopefully it plays phone tree a little bit and maybe extends a little, and you just meet at someone's home or in a library or some other public place, and you just meet and you make a commitment to each other to meet, and you talk and you work through your writing, and through that you find a very healing process as people start to talk and share and tell their stories, and who knows, maybe a whole new book would come out of it.
I'm glad you stressed that we're running out of time, because in our community we're lacking a lot of elders because they're passing on, and this is the problem my dad has of telling that story. It's just that there's very little elders around to share that story, so we could keep on the same path of keeping our identity intact. So I'm glad that when you stress that time is really crucial, yeah, we are on a time.
Yeah, in communities where you only have a handful of elders left, I do believe in the power of the written word, but when we're in a race against time, video documenting things is really a good way to go. Very good way to go. Yeah. Do you want me to talk about the writing salon? You know more about it though.
The way I've been explaining is that a writing salon is a little bit different than, and I know in Ketchikan there's one that people participate in where they get together and they learn some kind of technique, and they have wine and dinner and whatever, and so it's a thing that you could do in your community. But a writing salon is more of like for people who don't have the time to take a creative writing class. It's scheduled to around people's schedules. It's, you know, you can meet in a coffee shop or in someone's house or, you know, a specific place, but you can have your class in small blocks of time. So you can actually learn something in maybe a weekend, or, you know, Tuesday nights for the next 4 weeks we're going to study this. They have people coming in, and usually it's a small fee, so it's not a whole semester class. It's just smaller fees, so it's more community education. So that's what a salon is, and food, things like that.
Nope, I don't have the time. I don't have the time to do a timeline.
How ironic.
That's okay, because you know what? That means, Liz, you get out of helping me, because I was going to make you help me, because she was the pro when we were at the Arctic Institute. She like came out with every date for everything. It was awesome. Anyway. Yeah, just real quickly, I also want to mention that I'm going to put the books back out over here so that anyone who wants to write down the titles to all these books, you can, that we have out on the table. But if you are interested in any of the collections that we've gotten for Alaska Native and Tlingit archives, any information that you can get is on those CDs that are back there. But if you are interested in the writing books and things, we'll have those out here. But my mother and I have just started a nonprofit called Raven's Blanket, which is, did you have the mission statement on there? I got to remember it. Our mission statement is basically we're a nonprofit that is going to hopefully be perpetuating indigenous cultures through media, arts, and education. So pretty much whatever we can do creatively with other people to perpetuate everybody. Because the one thing, we actually originally started out with it being a Tlingit nonprofit to support the Tlingit language and culture, which is interesting because you might have noticed that my mom's Sami and not Tlingit. And then pretty soon, as we started discussing more and more and more, well, our friends are Tlingit and Inupiaq, Tlingit and Filipino, Tlingit and, and so we realized we should just keep it indigenous. You will probably be hearing more and more and more about us as time goes on, and hopefully we'll get an internet website up soon. I'm learning that in 3 weeks. Anyway, but maybe some of our cards for contact information might still be on the back table. If they're not, you can come up and just ask us. And the writing resources that we are just kind of blowing through are going to be on the table.
Oh, do you want me to read that? Where is it?
Just read
Oh.
the end.
Okay. Gunastish hashkashnichi hushtin kunachtishanidi. Telling our stories.
For anyone in the room who actually understood me and heard me slaughter the language. Anyway, sorry. I speak with an English accent. We call it the university English accent. But Andy Hope really was an inspiration, actually, for this workshop that you're in right now. He was an avid writer. He inspired my mom a lot in her writing. They inspired each other, or they bugged each other, I guess, a lot about the writings and things. But to him, we do owe a lot. This conference would not exist without the work that Andy did. So Gunashish to Andy.
And thank you guys for coming and attending. And there was a few things that we skipped, but I just want to encourage you to use the Writers Market series. There's even one on agents. So pretty much if you're going to write nonfiction, you use the proposal method and you submit a proposal. But if you have fiction, you want to usually get an agent first. So you're actually submitting your work and like a proposal to an agent first. And Writer's Digest has a whole big book on agents. And if you subscribe to their magazines, they also have an internet site that you have access to. And Poets and Writers is my favorite one for poets and also writers. And they also have one that they'll email you to. And there's a Poets Market writing children's books. There's lots of that too. So you can even organize your writers group in Huna. I helped organize an all Native children's writers group, and I don't know if it's still going or not, if they've had any meetings, but they had a specific idea of what they wanted to do, and there was about 7 people who wanted to write their stories and in the children's book format. So, just use your imagination, but writers need to stick together, because we're kind of strange people, aren't we?
Especially if you're writing for a paper.
Yeah. So Gunash Chish, thank you guys for coming.